major prophetic themes. Okay, so what are the major prophetic themes? First of all, Prophets 1 features the prophets that are, what type of prophets are we looking at in Prophets 1? Early warning prophets, correct. Early warning prophets. Early warning prophets. All right. Who are the early warning prophets? Isaiah, Micah, who else? Joel, Elijah, and Elisha. What does the name Elisha mean? God is salvation. Very good, yes. And Elijah? Yah, Eliah. Right. Yah is God. Yah is God, which really means the sovereign God of Israel is God. All right. So how about a Hebrew word? I almost forgot that. Whoa. Wait a minute. What's the Hebrew word for today? I don't even know. Never done that before. All right. The Hebrew word is Moshiach. Moshiach, which of course is the word we know for Christ, or Christ is derived from the Hebrew word Moshiach. What does the word Moshiach mean? You should know this real easily. All right. Mashiach. Let me see if I can put the vowels in the right place. Yep. Mashiach. So, how would you spell it? Mashiach, which really means anointed. Why do I want two N's there? I tend to spell as I speak. So the word is anointed, or anointing, Mashiach. All right? So, word Mashiach there is, and then you add Mashiach, and that's, of course, personified in a person, Mashiach, the anointed one. Mashiach, anointing, Mashiach, the anointed one. How did they go from Mashiach to Christ? Well, it went from Hebrew to Greek, from Greek to Latin, and then we ended up with Christ in English, but it's the same word. And so when you say Christ, you're actually saying the anointed one. Right? All right, so let's talk about now the major prophetic themes. There are 5 of them. And what are they? Of Israel. How many of us are working through the prophets right now? Going through and doing your... Right, okay, so you should by now begin to realize that this is in fact an overarching theme that we find in the Bible. It's throughout the prophets and very frequently presented. Yes?
Sometimes I think they're talking about restoration of Israel overall, but then they're really talking about it in terms of that time. Can we still consider it overall restoration of Israel?
Yeah, I think it's fair to just to put it in that category. There is an ultimate restoration of Israel, the great restoration. You can say that. We're going to see tonight that Isaiah talks about 2 restorations, and so yes, but there is a great restoration, a final restoration of Israel. So that's certainly a good point. So then also another prophetic theme that's reoccurring, overarching, is of Zion. Remember a few weeks ago we said that the word Zion means a sign, a post, indicator, and it really says this is it. This is it, Zion. And then, of course, what was that? You have to forgive me, I don't hear well. I got tinnitus, and I don't always pick up, what people are saying. So, the great king, all right. You have to speak loud for me. Universal judgment. And, of course, last but certainly not least is the it's the new creation. Great redemption, the new creation. We'll see that tonight represented for the first time in the Word of God in the book of Isaiah. So those are the 5 dominant prophetic themes that we find in the Bible. If you take all of the prophets and you dump all of them into a computer and a simulator, and you were to chronicleize everything and put them in order, you would find this would be the outcome. In terms of frequency and in terms of also relevance, intensity, as the prophets put emphasis on the different prophecies. So, which one of these prophecies do we find? We remember about 3 months ago or so, that couldn't have been 3 months. Some time ago we spoke about the importance of Leviticus chapter 26. And we said that Leviticus chapter 26 it's a foundational chapter as it relates to Bible prophecy, and that much or maybe most of Bible prophecy is founded in Leviticus chapter 26. Remember that? What is Leviticus chapter 26 about? Yeah, in a nutshell, yes. It puts a lot of relevance on Israel's need to obey God, to refrain from idolatry, to observe his Shabbats, and to honor him, to keep his sanctuary from being profaned. And then he lists the things that will happen to Israel: war, famine, plagues, and what was it? Pestilence, war, famine, plagues. And then if they would continue, he would bring the ultimate judgment upon them, which is diaspora. But at the end of the chapter, he introduces the restoration. That's the first time we see it in the Bible, Leviticus 26. And then in Deuteronomy, he brings it back to bear again. And so we know about that fairly well. We'll read a little bit from that here tonight. So let's begin. So let's begin to look at the restoration of Israel. It's a fundamental prophetic concept that we find in the Bible. The dispersion of Israel, and the ultimate restoration of Israel. Much of Bible prophecy, in fact, I would say just about all of Bible prophecy, hinges on that entire event. Israel being driven out into the nations, and God ultimately restoring Israel to the land of Israel. And what we're going to see tonight is that when he begins the process of restoration, simultaneously, at the same time, he begins to prepare to judge the nations. They happen concurrently. Okay? So we'll talk about that here in a few moments. So let's talk about the restoration of Zion. So, a lot of what we see in the prophets point to this, makes it that more relevant, that more significant, and frequently occurring as well. So in Leviticus chapter 26, we talked about that a few moments ago. Let's go back to Leviticus 26. We're going to take a peek at this. I think we read the entire reference already. Let's go back and recap it just a little bit. So it begins in chapter 26, verse 1 and 2. God says, actually 1 to 3, "You shall not make for yourselves idols, nor shall you set up for yourselves an image of a sacred pillar, nor shall you place a figured stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. So no idolatry. And idols in this context are physical objects that were worshipped. Today, idolatry does exist without the actual bowing down to physical objects. Idolatry can happen in our hearts. We can make idols of all sorts of things. So idolatry is something that God is particular about. We put nothing before him. All right? Even our own selves, which as Christians, as free Christians, we tend to want to do. And then you shall keep my Shabbats and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. So his Shabbats are important, significant, relevant. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so as to carry them out, and then he goes on to list the benefits, the blessings that will come as a result. But then it goes on, he goes on to say that if you don't, here are the punishments that will come upon you. Now, at the end of that list of punishments, and they're pretty awesome, he's going to multiply that punishment 7 times over. And then at the end of it, it says in verse 33, he says, you, however, I will scatter among the nations and will draw out a sword after you as your land becomes desolate and your cities become a waste. Now, this happened, and what we see in the next 5 or 6 verses, there's 34 to 39, is that God is going to, as they're driven out, God's going to take that time, that sabbatical, it's really a shabbatical, and he will give the land its Sabbaths. He will give the land its rest, which he does. It would go on for almost 2,000 years. At the end of that, now, he begins the process of restoration. So we got a lot of scripture to read tonight. Who would like to begin reading for us? Chapter 26, 40 to 45. This comes at the end of the period of time after Israel is driven out into the nations and the land has received its Sabbaths, the Sabbaths that they would not give to it. So 40 to 45. Anyone?
But if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their unfaithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, and that they also have walked contrary to me, and that I also have walked contrary to them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised hearts are humble, and they accept their guilt, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, I will remember. I will remember the land. The land also shall be left empty by them, and will enjoy its Sabbaths while it lies desolate without them. They will accept their guilt because they despise my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor shall I abhor them, utterly destroy them and break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God. But for their sake I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord.
Right. So that's pretty foundational. God pointed, of course, to the time when he begins the process of this incredible redemption of the land, restoration of the people, reunification of the land and the people. Very important time in prophetic, in God's prophetic timeline. And also, let's go to Deuteronomy now. We read Deuteronomy chapter 4. That correlates with what we just read perfectly. But in Deuteronomy chapter 28, what we're going to read now is going to add a little more perspective to what God is doing here and how he is expecting Israel to react to his wishes and to his commands, his statutes. So someone, if you would, please also read 28 of Deuteronomy, 64 to 68. We all have to share in the reading tonight. We've got a lot of reading to do. So Deuteronomy 28, 64 to 68. Anyone?
The Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. And there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which you or your fathers have not known. And among those nations you shall find no offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but there will be a buyer.
So that captures the essence of the diaspora, the type of dread that they would experience in the diaspora, but comes at the end of that period, the restoration. Now, there are a lot more references we find in the early prophetic period of the Bible. And when I say early prophetic period, I'm talking about, the Torah. We know that the prophets followed the writings in the Torah, but we're talking here about early prophetic writings, references, that's found in the book of Exodus, the book of Genesis, in all of the books of the Torah. So there are many more that points to restoration, the blessings and the curses, Deuteronomy chapter 4, and so on. So now let's look at what the prophets, these particular prophets, had to say about restoration. So let's go and begin to read. Of course, the major prophet in this section here, of course, is Isaiah. Isaiah had a tremendous amount to say about restoration. He had quite a large portion of the Bible, 66 books. The largest book in the Bible, if you don't count the book of Psalms. And so let's begin to look at some references in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 10. Who would like to read for us 20 to 23? Speaking of a remnant returning. Now remember that and we'll read this here momentarily, that there were two significant restorations to the land of Israel, the people of Israel. One came after the Babylonian destruction of Judah, Jerusalem. That was a partial ingathering, but it wasn't ingathering. A remnant certainly returned, but there's also the promise of a greater restoration. So the Babylonian return from Babylon, which Jeremiah prophesied about in Jeremiah chapter 25, that it would happen 70 years after the destruction of the temple, which is exactly what happened, exactly according to Jeremiah's prophecy. Now, Jeremiah prophesied, but didn't prophesy concerning what will ultimately happen to that partial ingathering, that they too would also be driven out from the land, and that what God spoke of in Leviticus chapter 26, the ultimate dispersion, was not complete with 586 BC, with the Babylonians' destruction of Jerusalem, and that it became complete with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So we're going to see here momentarily that God spoke to Isaiah concerning two restorations, or two ingatherings. The first one, minor, significant, but limited. All right? So let's read that. Someone has that reference for us, Isaiah chapter 10, 20 to 23.
The remnant left of Israel, the survivors in the house of Jacob, will no longer depend on allies who seek to destroy them, but they will faithfully trust the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return, yes, the remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. But though the people of Israel are as numerous as the sand of the seashore, only a remnant of them will return. The Lord has rightly decided to destroy his people. Yes, the Lord of heaven's armies, has already decided to destroy the entire man.
Which is absolutely amazing, because Isaiah is speaking early in his ministry concerning what God will ultimately do with Israel because of their lack of obedience to him, which he did. And then he makes reference to that partial ingathering, that limited ingathering that occurred after 586 BC. Now, he also referred to a second ingathering, that God will bring them back a second time. Someone else read for us Isaiah chapter 11, 11 to 12.
The Lord will reach out his hand a second time to bring back the remnant of his people, those who remain in Assyria and northern Egypt, in southern Egypt, Ethiopia, and Tzemach, in Babylonia, Hamath, and all the distant coastland. He will raise a flag among the nations and assemble the exiles of Israel. He will gather the scattered people of Judah from the
much broader. It seems to be complete. Whereas the remnant returning that he spoke about in the chapter before seemed to refer to only a few returning, which is exactly what happened after the Babylonian exile. All right? The largest number of the sons of Israel living in the land of Israel before 70 AD, after the Babylonian exile, was never more than a quarter of the Jewish population. Some people would say a third, but I think it's more real to say a quarter of the Jewish population lived in the land of Israel. So 3/4 of the Jewish population lived mostly in Babylon and in Europe, Spain and Portugal, France, and even as far as Britannia over the sea across to what we call Britain. So the diaspora was vast, and that first ingathering was very partial. But what we've read, what was read here just now, is clear. It's referring to a much broader ingathering. God's plan to bring them all back. Now, what's significant about this is that it refers to him lifting a standard for all the nations, right? If you read verse 10, in that day the nations will restore to the root of Jesse. Who's the root of Jesse? Yeshua, the Messiah. So the nations will restore to the root of Jesse, who will stand as a signal for the peoples, and his resting place will be glorious. The latter chapters of Isaiah talks about the nations ultimately would get involved in the literal transportation of the people of Israel to the land of Israel. So consider that in light of what we just read. Yes, Isaiah 60, 61 clearly indicates that the nations will actually get directly involved in the process. So they will restore to the root of Jesse, who is Yeshua, as he being a signal, an ensign to the people. His resting place would be glorious, but then it goes right on to talk about the restoration of Israel. So what would the nations restore to Yeshua? Just the son of Jesse, the people of Israel. So that signal, that ensign that will be raised for all the nations, who is Yeshua, will make a statement to all the nations, bring my people home. Bring my people home. And that's reflected in several areas in the prophets. So this is a different ingathering. This is a second ingathering, which is what we are seeing today. You're a blessed generation because you're living to see this second ingathering. You know, Jesus cautioned, or he forewarned that generation in Jerusalem. You know, the women that were weeping for him as he was going to Golgotha. What did he say to the woman? Don't weep for me. But concerning Jerusalem, it was going to be destroyed. So that generation saw God's ultimate destruction of Jerusalem and his most heavy-handed correction, chastisement of Israel. He drove them out. But we are more fortunate in that sense because we live in the time when he's doing the other aspect of that, which is to bring the people back and restore them to the land of Israel. And we in Messiah, we have the opportunity to get beyond ourselves and really be a part of that process. I mean, literally, we have that opportunity to be engaged in that process. It should only be done by faith. In other words, if you have a word of faith directive to be involved in that, but we have that opportunity as believers to get directly hands-on involved in that process. Just as Isaiah said would happen. So, restoration of Israel, tremendous. Also, let's read. God has Israel scribed on the palm of his hands. Let's read that reference in Isaiah chapter 49, 14 and 16, as it relates to restoration of Israel. This reflects how determined God is. 49, 14 to 16, if you're going to get that, Lisa.
The Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, and my Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing child, and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you.
Go ahead.
See, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands, and the walls are continually before me.
Okay, wonderful. So he is saying, I'm committed to that restoration, Israel. You're inscribed on the palm of my hands. In other places in the prophets, he refers to Israel as his bride. He is Israel's husband, and he will not abandon or forsake them. Let someone also go to Isaiah chapter 35, 1 and 2. Speaking now to the land of Israel itself, remember, God was concerned about the land of Israel, the very literal land, when Israel would not give it its Sabbaths. And what did he do? He put Israel out, who were defiling the land by not giving it its Sabbaths, so that the land can do what? What did he say? Enjoy its Sabbaths. Right? Now, that's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it, right? But God wanted the land to have its Sabbaths and to enjoy its Sabbaths. Drove Israel out. Part of the reason is that they were not giving the land its Sabbaths. Ponder that for a moment. How does that fit into our doctrine, our Christian paradigm? It doesn't. Because we have these ideas about God that's really not biblical, right? But God is concerned about the very literal land of Israel. And ultimately, all of his creation, all lands will observe and enjoy God's Sabbaths. It's not only for the land of Israel. The land of Israel, the people of Israel are an example. They themselves are like an ensign to all the nations. Here is what God expects. Here is what God wants. Ultimately, what God wanted for Israel would be accomplished throughout his creation. That we'll see as well. So also, the prophet Joel now, in Joel chapter 3, who would like to read a little bit in Joel for us? Joel chapter 1, verse 1 and 18 to 21. Oh, we did? All right, so how would we do that?
I'll read it. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. The joy of Lebanon will be given to it, the splendor of Carmel and Sharon. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God.
Restoration of the very land. If you read, now we'll get to Ezekiel in a couple of months. If you read Ezekiel chapter 36, it is incredible in regards to what we're talking about at this moment relative to the restoration of the land and the people. All of Ezekiel chapter 36 is devoted to that. The land will be restored, and so will the people, and God will conjoin them together, and then they will represent God's inheritance. Nakla. Nakala. The Hebrew word for marriage, union, is nakla. It comes from the Hebrew word nakala, heritage, inheritance. So, incredible insight there that Isaiah gives us, but Ezekiel really expands upon it tremendously. It's wonderful. So now let's look at Joel chapter 3, verse 1, and then 18 to 21 in Joel chapter 3. Joel chapter 3, verse 1, and then 18 to 21. So verse 1. Verse 1. All right, so 3, verse 1, and then you got it.
For behold, in those days and at that time, I will bring back, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat.
Okay. Go ahead.
And I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations.
This what the inheritance is right, that's what it says.
Right. They keep going.
No. So you read a little more, which is good. So God is saying, Israel, my inheritance, nations, you have scattered them, but God was the one who dispersed them. But what happened, what we're going to see as we study, is that the nations went too far. They went further than God wanted them to go in regards to bringing his punishment upon Israel. Now, note what I said earlier, that when God begins the process of restoration, at the same time, he also begins to prepare to do what? Judge the nations, right? And that's what Joel, and this is one of the reasons I really love the book of Joel, because it's so concise and straight to the point. He says what all of the prophets says, but much more condensedly and much more succinctly, right? And so in Joel chapter 1, verse 1 again, for behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, then he will also begin to judge the nations. So now, also in 18 to 21, who would like to read those verses for us? Joel chapter 3, 18 to 21.
And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and a fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and shall water the valley of Shittim. Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness, for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation.
So, 21, did we finish it? No, 21?
I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed, for the Lord dwelleth in Zion.
Some pretty profound verses, right? Pretty profound verses. And typically when people read, well, when people teach from my experience, from Joel chapter 3, they completely omit those verses. In fact, they go further back and they sort of ignore 16 to 21. Why 16 to 21? Because Victoria read 18 to 21. Let me read 16 and 17 for you. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth tremble. But the Lord is a refuge for his people, a stronghold for the sons of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will not pass through it anymore. Why do you not encounter many Bible prophecy teachers teaching on this? Because it's extremely Zionist. It's a little too Zionist. It's a hot potato in that regard. It's a little too Zionist for many Bible prophecy teachers, because the emphasis is Zion, the people of Israel, the land of Israel, God's dwelling in the midst of Israel, his favor returning to the land of Israel. So that's a little bit of a Zionist hot potato. So I think from the standpoint of many people, they would wish that those verses were not there at all. Makes things a little easier to deal with. But they're there. And they're speaking of the ultimate restoration of Israel. Yes? That'll preach. All right, so restoration of Israel, pretty profound with Isaiah in particular, but Joel is powerful. He is boom. You know, Joel. I'd like to know what he looked like, the prophet Joel. Probably a elderly guy, 110 pounds or something, but a firebrand. A firebrand. You can just see him, right? So let's now look at the other aspect of Bible prophecy. Then the other theme, overarching theme here, is the glorification of Zion. So, the glorification of Zion is again so relevant when we study in the prophets. First of all, it says here in Genesis chapter, let's talk about Zion. It says in Genesis chapter 22, verse 14. Who would like to read that for us? And this is a verse that we've heard and read so many times, and we've put so many different aspects to it. Genesis 22, verse 14.
Abraham named the place Yahweh Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided.
Right now that's a bad interpretation. I was hoping that your Bible would have given something a little different. Does anyone here, does anyone Bible says something different than the Lord will provide? Jehovah Yah, Jehovah Jireh, we say, we're going to look at the actual word in Hebrew. It's not Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh could mean provide. But if you look this up in your concordance, it's a different word that's actually used in Genesis chapter 22. Does anyone have a different translation? Yes.
Well, in verse 8 it says, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering.
All right. Let's take a look at the actual word that's used. You have about 3 or 4 different words in Hebrew for, Lisa, you had something? No. The word Jehovah Jireh is not the word that's actually used in the Bible. Yes, Faith? No, we're getting somewhere. Your Bible says be seen? A note. Why is it a note? I have no idea. Because the actual word, and again, I looked it up just this evening to reinforce what I'm going to tell you. The actual word is not Jehovah Jireh. It's Jehovah Re'eh, or Yahovah Re'eh, which is to be seen or to see. And I'll put the word that's actually in your Bible up here in Hebrew. So it's an incredible thing, but you ought to be able to research this yourself, and you'll be amazed when you do, because what I'm saying to you is absolutely true, and it's even more powerful than God providing. So that's the actual word that's used in the Bible. Those of you that are capable in Hebrew, what's that read? How do you spell that? Ra'ah. Ra'ah. Comes from the word re'eh. The Hebrew word re'eh is to see. To see, literally to see. Re'eh is also to be seen or to see or to look. Be seen is a good translation as well. So re'eh or ra'eh, sometimes you see it in your concordance as ra'ah. That's also good. Slightly different meaning. So, yes?
What's the second to last letter in the first word you spelled? Is that a Y?
Yes, that's my why. Why do I do that? I have no idea. But that's my why. It's a bit of a funky why. Genesis 22, verse 14. Now, this is important because of the actual word that's used there, re'eh, ra'ah, because it means to see or be seen. What's the Hebrew word for shepherd or pastor? Re'eh, ro'eh, ro'eh. It comes from the same word, re'eh, to see. Why is a shepherd or a pastor, ro'eh, connected to re'eh? Because that's what a shepherd does. That's what the pastor does. That's what the shepherd does. He sees. Now you have to really do, I did the word study on it, but you really have to do a word study to appreciate this. So the word to see, re'eh, is also the word for shepherd or pastor. The word pastor is used in the Tanakh, in the book of Jeremiah, but it's the same word for shepherd. To see, to gaze upon, and that's what the shepherd does. He gazes upon the flock. So, when you put that together in regards to what Abraham said, that from this place the Lord will see. Sometimes it says to be seen, and that's not wrong, but the word actually means to see, to look, to see. So when you put that in context now, he's saying that from Zion, the Lord will shepherd, he will be a pastor, he will see, he will look upon. You know, God speaking to Solomon on the day that the temple was dedicated, in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, he says my eyes and my ears will always be attentive to the prayer offered up in this place, which is Zion, which is Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. So this is the aspect of what Abraham said. From this place, the Lord will see. He will shepherd Israel and ultimately shepherd all of humanity from that place. Why would he see from that place? Because that is his dwelling place. That's where he will dwell. That's where he will set up his throne. From there, he will look upon his creation. From there, the Lord will see. So, having God provide from that place is wonderful, right? We make that connection. It's good. It's not bad. I'm not sure how Bible translators came up with Yireh. Yes?
And Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will see to it. As it is said to this day, the Lord will show himself on the mountain.
So the Lord will show himself, the Lord will be seen, the Lord will see. Right. See to it. So that's a translation. Because the word that's actually used does not really imply that. That's implicit of God providing salvation on that mountain, which is not bad. But it's not really what Abraham saw and said. My New American Standard is not accurate. It says God will provide on this mountain.
It says will provide, but there's a note, and in the note it says, let your lips be seen.
Yes.
And
So if someone has a device, maybe you look up Jewish publications, Tanakh, and just interested to see what they say in the Tanakh. All right, so that's a bit of a different spin on things there a little bit, especially since we're being faithful to the actual Hebrew word that's used in the text. What happened that we ended up with God would provide, it has to do with an idea that Abraham was directed to provide his son there and that God's going to provide his son there. So that's where it comes from. And it's not bad, but it's not accurate. I think saying that God will see, he will be a shepherd from that place is also profound. Because he would send, he would provide the shepherd that will be the one who will see from that place. Right? All right. So now let's begin to look at the glorification of Zion. Some references there that we find in these prophets. Joel states that Jerusalem will be restored, and we read that here just now. We don't need to read it again. Isaiah now talks about, he makes a reference to Zion, Jerusalem being like the tabernacle in the wilderness. In Isaiah chapter 4, who can read for us verse 4 and 5, or actually 5 and 6 of Isaiah chapter 4? Anybody found that reference in the Tanakh? No? All right. So, Isaiah chapter 4 now, 5 and 6.
Then the Lord will create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her assemblies a cloud of smoke by day and a shining of flaming fire by night. For over all who are there will be a covering, and there will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, and a place of refuge for shelter from the storm and rain.
It's referring to a very literal physical glory that will sit upon Mount Zion. It will be visible. It will be something that's dynamic. It's real. It's the glory of God. The same glory that filled the tabernacle in the wilderness when Moses dedicated the tabernacle. What happened? The glory of God filled the tabernacle. It was a real, literal event that happened in this physical realm. It was, it was energy being expended. Boom. And God appeared. Boom, 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 boom. And light and energy force. He had to back away from it. It was so intense. Right? And the same thing happened when the temple was dedicated with Solomon. The same thing happened. Everybody had to back away from it because the literal glory of God filled the tabernacle. This is going to happen in Jerusalem. The difference is the inhabitants of Jerusalem will not need to back away, will not need to back away from the glory because we would be the habitation of the glory. We will bring the glory to Jerusalem. Why the rapture? Why the transformation why the resurrection? Because we will be resurrected into literal vessels that can harbor that same glory, that same energy. And we will bring that with us. And we become that glory that will exist in Zion. Yes?
So the branch in verse 2, that's the Tzemach.
The word branch in verse 2. I believe it's Natsur. You've got a couple of words for branch, and they all refer to Jesus, both of them, which is Natsur and Tzemach. Yes. And so there's going to be this factor of God's glory placed in the middle of Jerusalem. And it's going to be like the angel of the Lord that went before the people of Israel. Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. The difference is the vessel of that glory will be the bride, the church. All right, and then also, so you talk about the glory of the glorification of Zion. That's the glorification of Zion. And let's read in Isaiah now, chapter 2, verse 2. You talked about that there, Maria. So, chapter 2, verse 2. Chapter 2, verse 2, yeah.
Say the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains, and it will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will sing to it.
So God's going to cause Jerusalem to be the highest of all the mountains. Now that's figuratively speaking. Of course, I don't think Jerusalem is going to grow beyond Mount Elbrus, which is 29,500 feet. I don't think it's a literal, expansion of the mountain. I think he's referring here figuratively, that Zion will be the highest mountain. That's again because the mountaintop, the Zion is glorified. It will be the highest mountain. Uh-huh.
More back to the branch. What do the Jews think that the branch is right there? Who do the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, who do they think that, or what is that referring to?
Well, they know clearly that the Tzemach is a messianic reference. They know it. They stay away from it. They don't quite treat it, the way that perhaps they should. But they understand that it's a messianic reference. It's very, very close to Yeshua, too close for their comfort. Because the angel, when Mary conceived, Gabriel said that he would be called the Natsur, or the Natsur in Hebrew, which is branch. So the angel directly connected Yeshua to the branch, and he's also the Tzemach. In Matthew chapter 1 or 2, the interaction between Gabriel and Mary. The word that you're going to find in your Bible is Nazarene. He will be called a Nazarene. And that's because the word Nazarene, actually, the root word is Natsur or Nazarene. So that's in Matthew. If we can just jump over there and pick it up real quickly. I should be able to get it right quick here now. No.
Are you saying that they're thinking that's the second coming, the first of them? They look at that as when Messiah comes for them the first time or second time?
The Tzemach is probably, from their point of view, more messianic than the word Natsur. Yes. Hold on one second. We're going to get this. Excuse me? 21? 121, you're saying? No, we'll find it. It's here. He will be called Nazarene. Nazarene or Nazarene.
Oh, it's on 23.
23. Read it for us.
I think it refers to Joseph. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth.
Go ahead, go ahead.
That it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall
He-
be called a Nazarene.
So what prophet is he referring to? It can only be Isaiah. It can only be Isaiah.
So is that wrong?
No, he's absolutely right. But was Isaiah thinking about Nazareth when he said that? No, he wasn't. The fact that Nazareth, the town Nazareth, became known as Nazareth comes from the reality that the word Nazareth means, Nazrim, or the word Nazareth, derives from the word Nazrim. And why does it derive from the word Nazrim? You're going to have to stay with me on this one. The Nazareth is not a biblical town prior to the New Testament. It didn't exist in the Old Testament period. And why is that? Because during the time of the Hashmoneans, the descendants of the Maccabees, to defend themselves from outside forces, particularly Rome, because Rome at that time had become this powerful, government, this empire that was seeking hegemony around the world, and they knew that Rome ultimately will sail up against Israel, will bring their ships in. They established the town of Nazareth as an outpost initially because of the height and the vantage of Nazareth. From Nazareth, you can see the Galilee, you can see any troops coming from the north, and you can see troops from way out in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean. So Nazareth became a lookout. Now the word Natsur also means lookout. And that's why we Christians are known as watchmen. So the word Natsrim or Natsur means watch post or to look out. What's the correlation between branch and to look out? Watchmen, to watch. Well, this is what the rabbis believe, that the word Natsur and branch are connected to watchmen, because in the ancient world, the watchman will get up into a tree, a thick tree like a mulberry tree or something, with the leaf, and they will station themselves on the branch of the tree and look out. So the word branch became synonymous with to watch. And that's why Nazareth got the name Nazareth, because it comes from the word to watch. Because the town was established to look out. As sort of a, you know what I'm saying. A high point where Israel, the Hashmoneans, would keep watch over the Mediterranean and the north. So, Jesus now was born in Nazareth, but he wasn't called a Nazarene or Nazarene because that's where he was born. He was called a Nazarene because he is the branch. As the angel said, and as Isaiah said in Isaiah chapter 2, he will be called the branch. He is the branch. Both Tzemach and Natsur refers to the same reality. So, why is he the branch? The Tzemach, the actual literal branch. Because when Zedekiah was killed, well, actually his eyes were taken out, and his two sons were killed, and they were taken to Babylon, the line of the sons of David, the kings of the sons of David, were cut off completely, right? So the Tzemach is the offshoot of that line of the kings of the sons of David. And that's why the Tzemach, the offshoot, is a messianic reference. And that's, again, we see that in the scripture repeated over and over and over. We'll read a little later on about the branch again, that Zechariah referred to the branch. So the branch is the whole, like for instance, you cut down a tree, right? Let me try and simplify because I made it a little complicated. If you cut down a tree, Zedekiah and his sons, the line of the sons of David being cut off. But you have a Tzemach, an offshoot that comes up. That offshoot can ultimately become a branch and bring life to the tree, hope to the tree. So think about a good example is my Julie mango tree right now. It's bearing fruit. A few years ago, it died. or it seemed to have died. And the winter came along and smacked it down, and it just withered. It had one main branch, and I said, okay, what's going on here? And so I cut it off. But then that one branch began to sprout, Tzemach. And it grew, and now it is the tree. So that's the idea of the Tzemach. He's the hope of Israel. Even though the kings, the sons of David, were cut off, remember the promise that God gave to David, right? The kingdom, a house, and a throne to his son. Well, when Zedekiah was taken to Babylon and his sons died, that promise seemed to be null and void, made void. But no, because of the branch, the Tzemach, that will become the branch that will give hope to Israel. That's the messianic reference. So now the early church referred to themselves as Nazrim. Nazrim. And they were not called Nazrims because of Nazareth. They were called Nazrim because Jesus was the branch, the hope of Israel. Yes? I know I did that a little bit not real clear. Perhaps maybe I can talk about that again sometime. Go ahead, Maria.
They're associating the Tzemach with the Messiah. Are you saying they think the branch is the Messiah that they're waiting for?
They have no choice but to connect the Tzemach and the Natsur with the Messiah, because the Bible is clear about it.
But the Messiah are Messiah? Or the Messiah they're waiting for?
Well, they don't see the Messiah as the Messiah that they're waiting for. So it's kind of interesting because they refer to Christians that they like, that they're amiable to, as Nazrim, which the root word there is branch. Right? That comes from Jeremiah chapter 31. Your watchmen, your Nazrim, will rejoice and so on. But they're not seeing Yeshua, Jesus, as the Nazrim or the Tzemach. But they know, according now, again, the idea of the Tzemach, it's a messianic reference for them, but not really strong. It's not one that they go to a lot, because it's probably a bit difficult to understand or difficult to receive based on the fact that Christians, early Christians, refer to Jesus as the branch. But if you go to Jeremiah chapter 25, now Isaiah mentions the branch 3 times, Natsur and Tzemach. And then in Jeremiah chapter 25, I believe, yes, I'm pretty sure it's 25. Actually, no, I'm wrong, it's 23. Jeremiah 25 is about judgment of the nations. Jeremiah chapter 23, we're going to see here another plain as day example that the Tzemach is a messianic reference. 23, 5 and 6. For behold, it says, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous Tzemach, a righteous branch. This is the branch. This is Yeshua. And he will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely. And this is his name by which he will be called the Lord our righteousness. So this Tzemach that God will raise up for David, based on the promise that he gave to David, even though Zedekiah and the line of the kings were cut off completely, the Tzemach will be the Lord our righteousness, and Israel will have hope in him. So clearly it's a messianic reference. We'll see it again later on. So the branch, the Natsur. Now I'm not sure why we got so distracted, but let's try and get back on track. All right. So we're still looking at the glorification of Zion. Okay. So Isaiah now chapter 46. And that was a good question, and we'll get back to that for sure. Isaiah 46, verse 13. Again, there would be God's glory, the glory of God in the midst of Israel on Mount Zion. 46, verse 13. Yeah, I hope.
I rouse him in righteousness, and I will make all his ways smooth. He will build my city and will let my exiles go free, without any payment or reward, says the Lord of hosts.
referring. That's kind of a weak reference, but it's referring to Zion, his city. He will build my city. Okay, let's go now to a stronger reference. Isaiah 66, 10 to 12. Once Zion is glorified and the glory of God returns to Zion, the nations will come to it. Walk by its light, it says in one place. Isaiah chapter 66, 10 to 12.
Rejoice for Jerusalem and be glad with her, all you who love her. Rejoice for joy with her, all you who mourn for her, that you may feed and be satisfied with the consolation of her bosom, that you may drink deeply and be delighted with the abundance of her glory. For thus says the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then you shall feed on her sides, shall you be carried, and be dandled on her knees.
It's referring to Jerusalem, referring to Zion.
That's when Zion is fully glorified and lifted up above all the nations will flow to it. Strangers will not come through it anymore. It's referring, I think, to the very essence, the very epicenter of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem at that time is going to be quite a spread. Nations will come up to it every year to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. Yes?
Here in Isaiah 2, when we were there before, it says people from all over the world will stream there to worship. That word stream, is that just like they're going to march there? What is stream?
Stream means like a train, like a stream of people. A flow, it's just going to be an ebbed flow of people coming up. A constant, an ebbed flow of the nations coming up. And that's in 2, right? Yes, and it's again, we find it again in the latter chapters of the book of Isaiah. We find it also in other places, such as in Zechariah chapter 14, where it says that every year the nations will come up to celebrate specifically the Feast of Tabernacles. But there's going to be a constant and an ongoing flow of the nations coming up to honor God. So before the COVID mess, there was, to some extent, that happening. Just about any time you go to Jerusalem, there was there would be just a mass of people coming from the nations. Most of them Christians, of course, some Jews as well to go to Jerusalem. But there was this earnest of that where people of the nations were streaming into Jerusalem constantly. Now it's completely gone because of the COVID contraption. So you would have people, when you go there, normally you'd have people from all over the world, from Brazil, from Mexico, from China, from every part, India, from every part of the world, the United States of America, Canada, England, all over, stream into it, which is just a foretaste of what that end is going to be like. So I'm glad you brought that from Isaiah chapter 2. I had forgotten about that, but that's a good addition.
Verse 2. Chapter 2, verse 2.
Yep. Zion would be glorified. So now let's talk about number 3, the great king. We've already been talking about him. He's the Tzemach, he's the Natsur, he's the branch. He is the Tzemach that becomes a branch, and the branch will bear fruit, and it will be the hope of the tree. Right? Julie mango tree, for instance, you guys had a fruit from the tree. That tree was dead about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was dried up, and the branch didn't look like any branch would come back to life, but it did. Right? And so the Tzemach. All right, now let's talk about the great king, who is in fact the Tzemach. So God made a promise to David. What was the promise that he made to David? A kingdom, a house, and a throne. For how long? For all eternity. A never-ending promise of a kingdom, a house, and a throne. And that God himself will build the house. And then he says, your son will build a house. The son of David, the Lord himself, will build that house and sit upon the throne and reign in that everlasting kingdom. So there's a reference there that clearly points to Yeshua, and yes, it does. Now, what we see also is that he would also be a priest, a kingdom, a house, and a throne. Clearly, he is a king. If there's a kingdom, there's a throne, and a house for that kingdom, he is the king. He is the Tzemach. He is the son of David, right? What is the connection between the Tzemach and the son of David? And we talked about it, but I just want to bring it from a different angle. The root of Jesse, the stem of Jesse, it also refers to, and the Tzemach. What's the connection? It's what we've been talking about. The root of Jesse, the offshoot, the stem of Jesse, is Yeshua. Who is this, the offshoot, the Tzemach, the hope of Jesse, the hope of King David? So that promise was made to King David. Now, kingdom, house, and the throne. But it's also associated with a certain priesthood. And what's the priesthood that's associated with a king? Melchizedek. So when you say Melchizedek, you're saying Melech, which is king, Zadik, righteous king, but he's also a priest. So this is referring to the great king, who is a righteous king, but also a priest. So there's a psalm that I like to go to, Psalm 110. I call it the war psalm, and it certainly is a war psalm, the war psalm. But it begins, maybe I'll just read the whole thing, just to capture the relevance of this as it relates to Yeshua being the great king and also being Melchizedek manifested in flesh as he returns, the high priest. I call it the war psalm because of this. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool at your feet. For your feet, excuse me. The Lord will stretch forth his strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. You begin to see why it's the war psalm. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power, in holy array, from the womb to the dawn, from the beginning of the day to the dawn of the day. The people of Israel will volunteer. His people will volunteer for what? This army. The people of Israel would be an army, just as God promised that they would be. Jeremiah refers to Israel as his war club. He says, with you I will smash nations. That's pretty intense, but that's what we see. The Lord has sworn, let me finish verse 3. Your youth are to you as the dew. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Who is he referring to? Well, he's referring to the very one who sits at his right hand, where it says, the Lord says to my Lord. This is King David writing here. Who is King David's Lord? Yeshua. So in the Hebrew it says, Yehovah says to Adonai. So Yeshua is Adonai in that sense. He sits at the right hand of God. We know that because that's exactly what Paul said, that Yeshua sits at the right hand of God. And when Stephen had his vision, he looked and he saw that Yeshua was at the right hand of God. This is the high priest, but he's also the king, Melchizedek, the righteous king. Let's read the rest of it. It's relevant to it being a war psalm. The Lord is at your right hand, and he will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. And he will judge among the nations, and will fill them with what? Corpses. He will shatter the chief man over the broad country, and will drink from the brook by the wayside. Therefore he will lift up his head. Verse 7 is really fascinating. There is a battle, there's a war. God is pressing the winepress of his wrath. That's what this is about. This is about the day of his coming. Yeshua, the great high priest, the king is coming. He's coming to bring judgment. Listen, we don't like what we're seeing with COVID. Get ready. We're going to see a lot more that we don't like. This is just a sample. If we lose our minds over COVID, you're going to go completely bonkers in about 2 or 3 years. So, but this movement in the world, this nation, this one world government is going to offend God in such a way that they will deserve every bit of this. And they're already doing it, by the way. They're already crossing lines that they should never cross. And so when God sends his son, the great high priest, Melchizedek, and he brings that type of judgment, it's going to be just. They're going to deserve it, in other words. We're not going to stand there and cry for them. I promise you we won't. So it's a war sound. And who's going to carry out this judgment? Well, the king himself, who is also a righteous priest, great high priest. So now, Zechariah, in Zechariah chapter 6, I'm going to read Zechariah chapter 6. I think I should read, yeah, why not? 9 to 13. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Take an offering from the exiles from Chaldei, Tobijah, and Jedediah, and you go to the same day and enter the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah, where they have arrived from Babylon. Take silver and gold, make an ornate crown, set it on the head of Yeshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So the high priest here is the son of Phinehas, a son of Zadok, right? And he is to make a crown of gold and put it on the head of the high priest, whose name happens to be Yeshua. God is creating a symbolism here that's important. In fact, in chapter 3, verse 8, he says, this Yeshua and the men from Babylon are simply a symbol of the branch, the one who will branch out. That's what he says. So this is a symbol. So we're looking at symbolism here. Then say to him, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, a man whose name is Tzemach, for he will Tzemach, he will offshoot, he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of the Lord. So the branch, the Tzemach, is the one who will build God's temple. Wow. Yes, it is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he who will bear the honor and sit and rule on his throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices, priest and king. So this is a reference here to Yeshua, Melchizedek, who is priest and king. And God wanted much effort put into that symbolism so that Zechariah will portray the reality of the branch. He will be king and he will be priest. And the council of peace, shalom, wholeness, will come as a result of that. See that? So this is the great king, Yeshua. So we need to fix in our minds that the great king is also a great high priest. And when he comes to rule in the earth, he will minister before God. He will, first of all, bring judgment. And as judgment is complete against God's enemies, sit at my right hand until I make my enemies a footstool for you. So what happens when that is complete? He's no longer going to be at the right hand of God, but he will be physically, literally, reigning on earth, symbolically at the right hand of God. Just as right now we are symbolically in him, where he's physically at the right hand of God, when he comes to reign, he will be positionally at God's right hand, but physically here on earth, reigning in Jerusalem. So to put it that way, there would be a period of about 1,000 years when Yeshua will literally, physically leave that position and be in the same position, but standing here on earth. God, in other words, God's authority, his right hand, will be physically located in Jerusalem before all the nations. And we're going to be there with him. We're positionally with him now, but then we will be literally with him. Not figuratively, but literally with God's absolute power and authority in Jerusalem. All right, so let's look at the great king, some references of the great king. Oh, Micah, yes. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Who would like to read that for us? That's a good one. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. We can stop for break after we look at this one.
Are only a small village among all the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel will come from you, one whose origins are from the distant past.
Amazing. Isn't that powerful? Who was alive before time? Melchizedek. Right? That's what we see. He's without beginning, without end. Now, we know that that's referring to Yeshua. Why? Because we've gotten many Christmas cards making that point to us, isn't it? But we want to go a little further down.
His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. So he has no beginning. Therefore, now let's read on. Therefore he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor has borne a child. Now he will give up the people of Israel until when she who is in labor will born a child. It's referring to Israel and the birth of Messiah Yeshua, and not only Messiah Yeshua, but also the church. So until that happens, Israel will be given over. He's talking about the diaspora of Israel, when God will turn his back on Israel to chastise Israel because of her sin. But then it goes on. Then the remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel. Who is he referring to? The remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel. But will return to the remainder of his brethren, referring to Yeshua's brethren, will return to the sons of Israel. It means that we've departed from them and we're returning to them. You follow me? Did the church, his brethren, depart from Israel? We certainly did. We did. In the 3rd century going forward until maybe 500 years ago, this process has begun where the brethren, the brothers of Yeshua are in fact returning to our place with the sons of Israel. Paul talks about the olive tree. Israel is the olive tree. And that the church is grafted into Israel. That's our place. That's where we belong, with Israel. Why? Because we're the priesthood that God will place squarely in the midst of Israel. That's where we belong. We are Jerusalem. We are the living temple. And now we're seeing now that that restoration period has begun. God has given over Israel to punishment. Now it's time for restoration. Now we're seeing his brethren, just as it says here, his brethren returning to Israel. So whenever believers in Yeshua begin to desire to stand with Israel, to support Israel, that's what's happening. We're returning to Israel. Because that's where we belong to begin with. We don't belong, our identity does not belong to the nations. We do not belong as Gentiles. We're not Gentiles. We're grafted into Israel. It's pretty clear. We're part of the commonwealth of Israel. Israel is the rich root. We are a wild branch, but grafted in. That's where we belong. Someone grafts a tree. He doesn't intend to take the graft off once it's grafted in. He intends for it to stay there, so it will bring about a particular fruit. So the Julie mango tree that I talked about, it's a grafted tree. One of my concerns about the Julie mango tree is that after it dried up, the graft would not hold, and it will bring a different fruit, it would present a different fruit, but it didn't. The graft held, and it gave a good fruit regardless. So the church is like that tree. It separated itself from for all practical purposes, it died, but then now we're coming back to life. The graft is holding after all, and it's going to bear good fruit. The graft is going to hold. The olives are going to be different, but good. The one who grafted that branch in, his intent was that the tree will bear different fruit, but good fruit. And that's the idea of the branch. So we are returning, the churches, his brethren and his sisters, are returning to the sons of Israel. That's why, that's what I talked about. When you talk about, you go to Jerusalem and there's just a stream of believers streaming up to Zion to understand or to even be a part of what God is doing in Israel. That's the mechanism that's working in us. He's reconnecting us to Israel. We don't quite understand it. I said Christianity at large, we're still kind of oblivious to what that's all about. Why do we love Israel? Why do we want to be a part of it? Because God is returning us to the place where we belong, alongside Israel. So the great king, he's the one that's doing this. He's the one that's bringing his people back, restoring them to the land of Israel. Remember, we read earlier tonight in Isaiah chapter 11, the standard, the root of Jesse, he's the one that's going to restore Israel. He's the one that the nations will restore Israel to. So it all ties together nicely. All right, let's take a break and we'll come back at 20 after 9. So Isaiah saw the great king also represented as the Prince of Peace. And that's a good, strong messianic reference in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. So who would like to read that for us? Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Perhaps one of the stronger, if not the strongest, messianic reference that we have in the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah 9, 6. Who can get that for us?
And that's just the epitome of the
Fullness. Epitome is not a good word there to use at all. But the fullness of the great king, Prince of Peace. And then, of course, Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 42 now, this is a really good reference, strong reference. Isaiah 42, we're going to read 1 to 4. Let me read it. Here, the king, the great king, is pictured as God's servant. God's going to refer to him as my servant. Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He is the anointed one. He is anointed with God's Spirit. He is so God's servant here, Yeshua, is filled with the Holy Spirit. He is anointed. He will bring forth justice to the nations. This reference here is actually, you can read this reference actually in the Hebrew. It says, he will judge the nations. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry out or raise his voice, nor make his voice heard in the street. A reference there to him not seeking notoriety. He will not seek his own fame. God's servant will not do this. A bruised reed he will not break, a dimly burning wick he will not extinguish, but he will faithfully bring forth justice. So those that are weak, and for instance, we have Christians that are being persecuted in the world. I mean, real persecution. Not just, we're not able to meet on a Shabbat. We're not able to hold hands or any of those things. That's not even close to what some people are actually experiencing. So people like that will receive justice. He will bring forth justice to them. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth, judgment. Again, that's what the word here means. In the earth, and the coastland will wait expectantly for his Torah, for his teaching, for his law. So this is a picture here of the great king. Of course, it's referring to the time of his kingdom when Jesus will literally reign in the earth as God's servant. Now, God's servant in that sense can also be relevant to us, can also relate to who we are. In the same sense, God has chosen us, he will uphold us, his soul will delight in us, he will put his spirit in us. We will bring forth justice to the nations. We should not seek our own notoriety. A bruised reed we shall not break. A dimly burning wick we shall not extinguish. Huh? Dimly burning wick? So think about a lamp. Think about a lamp that, you know, I grew up to some extent with kerosene lamps, right? And about 3 o'clock in the morning, your wick is about to go out. What do? You turn that little metal lever and it gives you more oil wick and you get a brighter light. So you bring forth light rather than you diminish light. You see. Someone who is a downtrodden person. Alright, so you think of someone that's downtrodden. No one in this room is downtrodden. Right? We live good lives. Relatively speaking. So you think about the people that are experiencing real hardships, real difficulties. You don't break them. You bruise reed, you will uphold, you will ensure that the bruised reed will continue. But a dimly burning wick you will not extinguish, but you will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not be disheartened or crushed. We will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice in the earth. Coastland. No, so this relates to us. We will not be discouraged. We will refuse to be discouraged. We will not be disheartened. Regardless of what COVID does and all of the nonsense that the world system wants to bring upon us, we're hearing now that the World Health Organization is pushing really hard together with other governments around the world to push this set of protocols until the middle of next year. In fact, Dr. Fusi, or whatever his name is, he's saying that, hey, every flu season we should apply these standards. Every flu season. So you see, it's just crazy what they're doing. It's just bizarre. It's their agenda. It's their Agenda 21 agenda that they're pushing, right? You look at their Agenda 21 manual, and some of the protocols, if not all of the protocols that we're seeing now being applied to this COVID is what's listed in their manual since 1984. Our beloved George Bush Sr. got up and said, Agenda 21 is a wonderful thing, New World Order. Just can't wait for it to happen, more or less. Our beloved conservative George Bush Sr. How many of us voted for George Bush Sr.? I didn't. I voted for Junior twice. But he pushed that Agenda 21 now. And the only reason I voted for Junior is because of the Clintons and who was going to succeed the Clintons. And I said, no, I've got to vote here. I have a responsibility to get Al Gore away from the office. My goodness. And so, but I wouldn't have voted for Bush if it wasn't for the fact that what was lined up alongside him on the other side was horrible, horrible. But the same agenda that Al Gore, the Clintons pushed, is being pushed upon us right now, being rammed down our throats right now. And they're going to get more forceful in Orange County. There are already COVID cops. Don't know if you know this. COVID standard enforcer, protocol enforcers. They're out there in Orange County and they're growing. There are efforts in the country to put together these efforts to send out enforcement officers that will enforce COVID standards. So hard times are coming, and there's no question about it. But the end of it is that justice will be established. We will not be discouraged by this. We will not get flustered over it. I think that's the most important thing for us. I'm not going to let them take my joy. I'm not going to let it happen. I'm not going to take them too seriously, actually. I'm going to do what's expected because we have to live peaceably in our community. It's our only opportunity to have a witness. But they push me to a certain point, and then I'll push back. Right now, they're not quite there yet. But you see, they're preparing for Christians in this country, particularly Christians, a difficult future. They've been waiting for this for a long time. Let me assure you of that. They've been awaiting this time for a very long time. So the great king, he's going to come and put an end to it. Justice, he's going to bring forth justice to the nations. All right, let's move on here. Let's look at some more aspects of this great king. Let's say Isaiah 16, 2-5. Who would like to read that for us? Isaiah 16, 2-5. Great king. 16, 2-5. 16, 2-5.
Then like clean birds are scattered nestlings, the daughters of Moab will be at the forge of the army. Give us advice, make a decision. Cast your shadow like night at lightning. Hide the outcast, do not betray the fugitive. Let the outcast of Moab stay with you. Be a hiding place to them from the destroyer. For the extortioner has come to an end. Destruction has ceased. Oppressors have completely disappeared from the land. A throne will even be established in loving kindness, and a judge will sit on it in faithfulness in the tent of David. Moreover, he will seek justice and be prompt in righteousness.
So again, that's the throne of David, that's the son of David, that's the
Root of Jesse, that's the Tzemach. All right, let's talk about universal judgment now. We know that, as we saw here, even in Joel chapter 3, that when God restores Israel, simultaneously we will have his emphasis now becomes judgment to the nations. All right, so we started looking at this last week. And let's begin to look at this. Isaiah chapter 24, again, we read this a few weeks ago. It's sort of the quintessential chapter that deals with God's intent to bring justice or judgment to the nations in chapter 24. Isaiah, I'm going to read here 1-6. Behold, the Lord lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. Bad things are coming. And the people will be like the priest, and the servant like his master, the maid like her mistress, the buyer like the seller, and the lender like the borrower, and the creditor like the debtor. It's talking about the state of humanity during this time. Things would be turned around. Things would be completely turned around. The earth will be completely laid waste and completely despoiled. And the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and withers. The world fades and withers. And the exalted of the people of the earth fade away. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed laws, violate statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. Verse 5 is pivotal, important. The earth is polluted by its inhabitants. Think about what we're doing right now to the planet. I mean, think about it really. You know, I'm not much of a ecologist, tree hugger type. But the bare bottom facts is that we're destroying the planet. We are. I mean, it's real. We are destroying the planet. And that troubles me that we're doing this. Yes?
There's some countries that go all their ways straight into the ocean, and that's just polluting the waters 100%. Just hundreds and hundreds of ways. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's
eyes in my own lifetime. I remember being a kid, and I loved to fish as a kid. Go down to the seawall, and you just look over the edge, and the water is pristine up to 20, 30 feet. And you can see all manner of fish right up against the seawall. You know, all reef fish right up on the seawall. Snappers, you see small groupers swimming around. And it's all so clear and so pristine. But you go there now, and not even a bait fish, a toadfish, nothing is there now. Same spot. And that's true for many, many places where I grew up as a kid. What's happening? We're polluting, literally polluting the planet. Of course, there's an implication here that it's not only physical, but it's also spiritual, allegorical. We're certainly doing that. Think about abortions. Has abortions polluted the planet? Of course. I mean, think about what we've done in the last 100 years. It's possible that we've murdered close to 2 billion, 1.5 billion babies. Think about that number. The world is polluted. For they transgress laws, they violate statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse devours the earth, and those who live in it are held guilty. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burnt, and few men are left. Whew, that's tough stuff. It's tough stuff. And it's difficult to see that, you know, especially if you're young believers, for instance. New believers, not necessarily young, but new believers. You look at this and they have to back away from it because it's heavy stuff. It's weighty stuff. God's going to bring that type of, He's going to exact that type of judgment on creation. And the answer is yes, He is, because of what we've done and what we're continuing to do. But nevertheless, His actions are to restore and not to bring to a complete end. And He will bring restoration, for sure. All right, so also let's read on. Isaiah chapter 25, now 7 to 8. Let's read that as well. Let's read 6 to 8. Isaiah 25. The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all the peoples on this mountain, a banquet of aged wine, choice pieces of marrow, and refined aged wine. And on the mountains and on this mountain He will swallow up the covering which is over all the peoples, even the veil which is stretched over all nations. He will swallow up death for all time. The Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and He will remove the reproach of His people from all the earth. And the Lord has spoken. Let's read verse 9. And it will be said in that day, behold, this is our God for whom we have waited that He might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad in His salvation. So this is more so pointing to the feast, to the restoration, I think, more so, that God's going to bring upon the nation of Israel. But it happens after that period of judgment, after He judges the nations. Yes, Isaiah chapter 25, which comes before 6 to 9, which we just read, which is 1 to 5. It's talking about that judgment that He will bring upon the nations. All right, so let's read on here. Universal judgment. I'm not sure if we're going to get to do much study guides tonight. Doesn't look like it. So now, Joel chapter 3. This is all about judgment of the nations. Joel. Let's get to Joel. Now, this is a bit intense from a standpoint of judgment, the aspect of judgment, or the specter of judgment, I think I should say. It's pretty intense what we're about to read. We read some from this chapter earlier. We'll read some more. I'm going to read 2 to 17. Is that right? Yeah, 2 to 17. Why not? I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. The valley of Jehoshaphat is Megiddo. All right, so we need to clear that up right now, is Megiddo. And that's where Har Megiddo is going to occur, the valley of Jehoshaphat. It's known as Jehoshaphat, it's also known as the Jezreel Valley. Same valley, the valley of Megiddo. Megiddo is actually a mountain, actually it's a hill, a mountain. It's actually, Megiddo is a tell. You know what a tell is, right? It's a tell. A tell is an archaeological site where, in the case with Megiddo, the original settlement or the original city was built there by the Canaanites, and King Solomon took it over and he built on it. So he built on what the Canaanites had, and then other kings came along and built on what Solomon had, and on and on and on. So what you have there is multiple levels of archaeology. And that's what a tell is. A tell is actually like a mountain. It's a peak, a mountain peak, but it's really layers of civilization. So Megiddo is a tell. You can go there and you can go down and see all the different layers of civilization that has been on that spot. That's Megiddo. It's called Mount Megiddo. The Hebrew word for mount is Har, and that's where we get Har Megiddo from, which gave us the word Armageddon or Armageddon. So the mountain sits to the south and east of the Jezreel Valley, the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is where the judgment will take place. The word Jehoshaphat means where God will judge in the Jezreel Valley. That's actually the ancient name of the valley, Jezreel. So that's Megiddo. Megiddo will happen in Jehoshaphat. I will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance, my Nakalah, Israel, who they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land. They have also cast lots for my people, traded a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine, and that they may drink. Moreover, what are you to me, O Tyre, Zidon, and all the regions of Philistia? Are you rendering me a recompense? But if you do recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense upon your head. Since you have taken my silver and my gold, brought my precious treasures to your temples, and sold the sons of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks. Now that's fascinating, because this was written around the year 850 BC. The Greeks didn't come upon the scene until about 250, 300 BC. So you see, he's prophesying concerning a people that God would actually raise up in about 500 years, the Greeks, in order to remove them far from their territory. Behold, I am going to arouse them from the place where you have sold them, and return your recompense upon your head. Also, you see, that's a restorational statement, right? A restorational statement. It's going to restore Israel. Also, I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of a distant nation, for the Lord has spoken. Proclaim this among the nations. Prepare a war, rouse the mighty man. Let all the soldiers draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am a mighty man. Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and gather yourselves there. Bring down, O Lord, your mighty ones. A battle is being prepared. Let the nations be aroused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the winepress is full. That's a familiar reference, right? The winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. Obviously, he's referring to Jezreel as the valley of decision, where decisions will be made. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon grow dark. The stars lose their brightness. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth tremble. But the Lord is a refuge for his people and a stronghold for the sons of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will pass through it no more. So this is Armageddon. So there are two major conflicts that's being prepared for humanity by God, and the two conflicts are one, Armageddon, Har-Megiddo, in the valley of Jezreel, in the valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley of decision. And the second is Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog comes 1,000 years, according to the book of Revelation, after Armageddon. So Armageddon happens. This is the conflict that we're facing right now. Sets right before us, where God will enter into judgment there in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and he will bring correction. We saw it there in verse 16 and 17, right? He will reign in Zion. He will establish his reign. And that will go on for 1,000 years. At the end of the 1,000 years comes the Gog and Magog conflict, which is a bigger conflict in terms of numbers. But it's not a conflict that takes humanity, that takes the devil and his system centuries to prepare, such as this conflict right now. What I'm saying is the Armageddon conflict, this conflict, Satan has been working on this since Babel. He's been systematically, as best as he could, working at this since Babel, to bring about a second Babel, a second Babylon. And that's what this world system is. It's Babylon. So he's been working at this, and it's all going to come to an abrupt end, real sudden, when Jesus comes. All of his efforts, all of his hard work, all of man's contributions towards that world system will all come to an end like that. Now, the Gog and Magog struggle is different, because everything is going along fine, then suddenly, at the end of the millennial kingdom, the rebellion happens. It's as if it just pops. It says it there in Revelation chapter 20, that Satan is let loose from the abyss for a short time, and he brings the nations up to Jerusalem once again to rebel against God. So it's a quick work he does. How does he accomplish it? I don't know. But it's not going to be like Armageddon. Armageddon is his greatest effort. And it's going to be his greatest defeat. Well, his second greatest defeat. Gog and Magog is going to be the end of him. That's when God will cast him into the lake of fire. So maybe this is a good time to go to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 20.
Pastor, why didn't he just finish him off with the first battle? Why didn't he ever come back for another battle?
That's an obvious question, right? That's a low-hanging fruit type question. And here's what I would tell you. God wants to right his creation. He wants to correct it perfectly. He wants to sift the hearts of man fully. So at the end of the millennial kingdom, man will fully understand what God has done with Satan. The arrest for 1,000 years, the beast and the false prophet. At the end of that period, he's going to give man a chance, once again, to make a decision. And to make a right decision. And that comes the end. Now, God has determined, it seems, from my point of view, which is a new earth point of view, if you look back at the book of Genesis, the concept of evolution as it relates to creation. God has ordained a literal 7,000 years for redemption. That's my position. That 7,000 year period will come to an end at the end of the millennial kingdom. So it's God's timing. Everything's working towards the end of the millennial kingdom. So the Shabbat, 1,000 year Shabbat, which is the millennial kingdom, begins when Jesus comes, establishes his kingdom in the Father's kingdom in the earth, puts an end to Satan. So the planet Earth, God's creation, gets a Shabbat from Satan. 1,000 years. The seventh millennium. And according to God's purpose, at the end of that Shabbat is when he will bring about the eighth day, which is the day of the day of eternity, which is the new creation. So it's God's purpose. So why didn't he stamp out Satan? Because he wanted to give the world, creation, a Shabbat of knowing that Satan is removed for that Shabbat. And to understand what was done, why obeying God was so important. to reject Satan. But it seems as if much of humanity will not learn the lesson. And they will arise and they will come against God and come against his city once again. So God could have certainly put an end to Satan. I mean, Revelation chapter 19, pretty incredible. Jesus comes, the great high priest, the warrior king and priest, and we're coming with him, and we're just simply going to take a hold of the beast and the false prophet. We're going to bang them together, slap them into the lake of fire. Not much of a fight, not much of a resistance. That's what it says. Not the banging stuff, but that's what he's going to do. So he could have easily at that time cast Satan into the lake of fire, but that was not the time for it, for whatever reason. So let's read a little bit. 20 verse 1 to 3. This is following the destruction of the beast and the false prophet, following the end of that Armageddon battle. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding the key to the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the abyss and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were complete. After these things, he must be released for a short time. Let's take it down to verse 7. When the 1,000 years are complete, Satan will be released from his prison. So the 1,000 years is up. So this is a very short work on behalf of Satan. And will come up out of, will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war, the number of them like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So yeah, God could have just Jesus could have snatched up Satan, cast him into that lake of fire from the very beginning and not go through that whole process. But God is going to use that millennial kingdom and Satan's imprisonment to sift the hearts of men one more time. See what is in man's heart. At the end of that, there's a great rebellion. They all come up to Jerusalem again, the holy city, to attempt to destroy God and his people, well, Messiah and his people. And that's when, I love how simple it is. Fire comes down from heaven and destroys them. Boom, it's done. Not much of a resistance, not much of a battle. See? But God is sifting the hearts of men again to see who would stand with him, who would stand with his people. So, judgment, that's ultimately the end of that. And so let's read on here in chapter 20. Look at this period of judgment more closely. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found in them. This is the Holy One of Israel himself. This is the God and Father of our Lord Jesus. This is the Holy One on his white throne. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were open. Note that it's plural, right? Books, not singular. Books were open. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their actual deeds, what they've actually done. So people are being judged based on their deeds here, folks. Books are open. Book of life. This is not the Lamb's book of life, because the Lamb's book of life was fully exhausted at the beginning of the millennial kingdom, in that everyone's whose names were written in the book of life, the Lamb's book of life, resurrected at the coming of Messiah Jesus. This is the book of life. This is a broader book of life that relates to all creation, all of God's creation. Humanity from Adam all the way up to Gog himself, right? So from Adam to Gog, everyone outside of those of us in Christ, because we've already been judged. Our names were written in the book of life of the Lamb, and we've already been judged for 1,000 years. So in these books, the book of life, and then we can only, in fact, we can safely imagine what the other books are. If books are open, plural, and the book of life is open, people are being judged to life based on what's in that book, we can say that the other books are books of death. Second death, lake of fire. And they're being judged based on their deeds. The sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged. Each one of them according to their deeds. There's that reference again. Being judged based on deeds. And death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So this is the final judgment. There will be no more judgment after this. Absolutely none. Yes?
So this first book, these books that are plural, I always thought that those were the deeds, but it's not deeds, it's names.
The book names, yeah.
Well, the deeds be connected to it, you know. You can look at it like a file almost, you know. Here is Genghis Khan. Oh, Genghis Khan. Let's see. Oh, there are his deeds. His deeds are pretty heinous. Or, you know, you might say, here is Manasseh, grandson of Athaliah. Pretty bad deeds. Wait a minute. But he repented. His name is certainly going to be at the great white throne. But he repented according to what we see. He's going to be in the book of life, together with Abraham, together with John the Baptist, together with everyone outside of Messiah who is going to be judged favorably. So that in itself is pretty challenging, right? Because it says that people outside of Christ will be judged favorably. Their names would be in the book of life, this book of life. That's troublesome to our Christian doctrine. We don't know what Genghis Khan did, if he actually repented at the end of his life. He could have. His name would be in the book of life if he did. We don't think he did, but we don't know. So, did he know about the cross? Probably heard tell of the cross, heard the story of Yeshua. Genghis Khan marched in the 7th century or the 4th century or something, AD. So he must have heard the story of Jesus, but he's going to be judged based on his deeds apart from Jesus. That's tough. That's tough. If you take the strong Christian perspective, everyone who lived past the cross, regardless of their deeds, are going straight to hell. Everyone. If you take a strong Christian point of view. Because if you don't have Jesus, you're going to hell, right? Now, you can say, they can say, and they do, that the book of life really relates to those before Jesus. Like, you know, John the Baptist, Zachariah, Elizabeth, and everyone going all the way back to Adam. But once the cross happened, then you can't be in the book of life. You're either in the Lamb's book of life or you're in hell. That's the Christian point of view. But is that the God of the Bible? What do you think? Are there people living in the world today that has never heard the gospel or they've never heard the story of Yeshua? Yeah, even today. Millions of them in Borneo, in the Amazon, in the Congo, even in the Western Hemisphere, the Amazon, but the Inuit Indians, we call them Eskimos. There are many Inuit tribes that still hasn't seen the Western world, hasn't had the gospel presented to them, so to speak. So you're telling me that these people are all destined to hell? That's the Christian point of view, but think about that for a moment. There are people, vast numbers of people living in the Congo, in Borneo, in the Amazon, that have never seen the cross, never seen the Bible or Yeshua, according to Christian doctrine, they're hopeless. No, I don't think that's the case at all. God's going to judge everyone based on their deeds. So you might take the position that the man of Borneo living in the jungle, he can never have good deeds. Or the Inuit or the Kayapo Indian of the Amazon, their deeds can never match up to salvation, can never amount to salvation. What do you think about that statement? What do you think about Christopher Columbus and the conquest of the Americas? Before the conquest of the Americas, you had about maybe 1,000 different types of Indians living in the three continents, actually Central America, North and South America, about 1,000 different tribes and different types of Indians, and they had different cultures, different practices. Let's talk about the Arawak Indians, who lived in the Caribbean and in North-South America. They were a peaceful people. They lived in unity and in oneness with the land. They made reference to the Great Spirit, but they were not a hostile, warlike people. Their deeds were good. They lived to the best of their knowledge with their Creator and their creation. And at the same time, in some cases, on the other side of the island, you had the Caribs. The Caribs in Puerto Rico, they're called what are they called? The Cayate or something. I can't remember. But they were extremely warlike and hostile and cannibalistic. So let's see. Before Columbus came and brought Christianity to the Western world, you had the Arawaks, who were peaceful people, a family-oriented community. They existed throughout the Caribbean, and they lived in unison and in perfect order with their creation, God's creation. And then you had the Caribs who were trying to eat their babies. God's going to judge both peoples based on their deeds. Before the cross, they didn't even know that there was a cross. So on what basis will they be judged? Again, based on their actual deeds. I would venture to say that there would be many more Caribs thrown into the lake of fire than Arawaks. Not that every Arawak is somehow void of evil deeds, and not that every Carib is somehow void of good deeds. You understand my point? Paul made very distinct reference to this in Romans chapter 1, that the heathens, when they listen to that inner voice, the voice of the conscience, they instinctively follow the law of God. And beyond that, when they hear the voice of the conscience and they obey it, they're actually executing faith. The righteousness that comes from obedience to God's word. That's what the heathens, that's what Paul is referring to. That by their own dimension of faith leading to righteousness, they are justified. The heathens. And in Paul's day, there were many more heathens than there are today, we would think. Many more. And so Paul was making reference to those heathens who were away from the cross, away from the message of salvation that Jesus brought, that would live their lives out listening to that voice, either obeying or disobeying, and that would be the basis for their judgment. But that was 2,000 years ago, and it's still that way today. Again, today there are certain parts of Borneo where if a plane flies over, they're going to shoot it down and try to eat it. That's where they are. A Bible means nothing to them. Yeshua, nothing to them. God's not a hostile, despotic God. He's just going to cast them all into the lake of fire. No, he's going to judge every one of them. He's going to sift their hearts before the great white throne and judge them based on what they actually did. Don't think for a minute that that does not include us. Because each of us, we're going to be judged based on what we actually do. Just like them. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, Paul said it. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ to give an account for what we've done, whether good or evil. So if we do evil deeds, according to what Paul said, and we go before the judgment seat of Christ, what do you think the outcome is going to be? What do you think? If we're going to be judged based on our deeds, according to what Paul said, yes, of course. Even here in the book of Revelation now, Revelation chapter 22, John's about to close the Bible for us. God's closing the Bible for John. And God wants us to see something very important here in Revelation chapter 22, the end of the Bible. I'm going to read 12. Behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me, to render every man according to what he has done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. So Jesus is coming to render to every man what they have done. Now, my deeds are pretty awful. Yep, pretty awful. And apart from the blood of Jesus, I'm pretty damned. I'm hopeless apart from the blood of Jesus. So when he comes, I am convinced that I'll stand before God completely without guilt, without shame, because I know that the blood of Jesus has removed my sins. All right, so my standard of judgment is higher than that of the Kayapo Indian. Does not know about the blood of Jesus. All he knows is a natural principle, a law that he has lived by, his ancestors have lived by it, and that's all he's responsible for. So he's going to be judged based on his deeds. He's also going to be judged based on what he did with that voice that gave him direction in his life. Did he obey? We call it a conscience, right? That's what Paul said. That the voice of the conscience is actually the voice of God speaking to us. So the Kayapo Indian, he had that voice speaking to him ever since he was a child, telling him what to do, where to go, don't, yes, no, yes. And he obeyed it carefully. Then he's walking in faith. And his deeds are pure before God. You understand me? Even though he's never seen the cross. That does not take away from the true gospel of Messiah Jesus. We just read very clearly that he plans to judge everyone based on what they've actually done. Not on their affiliation. Right? We're not all going to heaven because we're Christians. And every Muslim is not going to hell because they're Muslims. It's the reality of what God is preparing for all the nations. God is not a despot that will give someone judgment that they do not richly deserve. You understand me? So, deeds are important. We'll see this again as we go along. So we didn't get to look at the new creation. The new creation, it's clear in Isaiah chapter 66, 65 actually, and 66. Let's take a look at that, Isaiah 65, and we'll wrap this up. When we get to Prophets 3, we're going to be looking at Book of Revelation, Daniel, and we'll be looking much further into the reality of judgment as it's represented in the book of Revelation. So, Isaiah chapter 60 now, it's actually 65. Let me see if I can actually get there real quickly. 65, Isaiah 65. I want to say it's verse 17. Let me see. Yes, verse 17. God says here, well, Isaiah says here, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, for the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. But be glad and rejoice in what I create, for behold, I create Jerusalem for rejoicing and her people for gladness. So this new creation is indelibly connected to Jerusalem, according to this. But then over in Revelation chapter 21, we see the greater revelation of this. What Isaiah saw in Revelation chapter 21, this follows the great white throne judgment that we just talked about. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. A completely new and different creation. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. So what did Isaiah say in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 18? Behold, I make Jerusalem a rejoicing for all the peoples. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death, there will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. First things have passed away. This is the new creation, and this is probably the most hopeful theme, emphasis that we have in Bible prophecy, the new creation. I would have wished that there would have been many more references about the new creation, but there isn't. But the little bit that we have is quite sufficient. God's going to put an end to rebellion. He's going to judge the nations. He's going to establish his kingdom in the earth. And there's going to be a new creation where there's no longer any fall. The fallen nature is completely put behind us. Have a blessed week.